Here's a question for you. If you didn't have to work and you just received an endless allowance, would you still choose to have a job? Okay, imagine this. You're lying on a beach one day, it's very pleasant, and you overhear a conversation between a tourist and a local fisherman. Why are you here relaxing when you could be out catching fish?
I caught enough this morning to last me 2 days, so I wanted to lie back and enjoy the day.
But if you work more, then you can sell the extra fish you catch. Then soon you could buy a motor, a second boat, and maybe one day a whole factory or a restaurant and a helicopter.
And then what?
Then, without a care in the world, you could sit here in the harbour, doze in the sun and look at the glorious sea.
But I'm already doing that.
And you realise that the tourist and the fisherman have pretty different ideas about why we work. In part, we work so that we can put food on the table, have a roof over our heads and clothes to wear. But that's not all there is to it. If it was, we would all view work like the fisherman does, just as a way to fulfill our basic needs. American psychologist Barry Schwartz says that the way we think about work is broken, and he blames the founding father of economics, Adam Smith. Smith believed that humans were inherently lazy. Sorry guys. And the only way to get people to work was to pay them. This is the assumption that underlies how we think of work, just working for the man to bring home the bacon. But Schwartz argues that it has created a system where the emphasis on financial reward stops people from finding other meaning in their work, a situation that leads to lost productivity and discontent. Think about how much time we spend wishing we were not at work. There's a GIF, meme, and e-card for everything from Monday-itis to 3:30-itis, hump day, and TGIF. I must admit, I think I've shared that TGIF GIF before. But we also know that money isn't the only thing that motivates us. We do lots of work that we don't get paid for. Chores around the house, looking after kids, playing music, or helping friends. In most cases, you're intrinsically motivated to do these things, rather than extrinsically motivated by a wage. In fact, some studies have shown that money can actually be a demotivator. In 1971, American psychologist Edward Deci conducted a study with 2 groups of college students. He offered one group a financial incentive to work on a puzzle, while a control group wasn't paid to work on the task. Deci observed that the people who were given no financial incentive spent longer on the puzzles and showed more interest in solving them. Author Daniel Pink built on Deci's work to develop the motivation trifecta. He argues that once we are paid enough money that financial worries are off the table, 3 things motivate us. Autonomy, to feel as if we have control over things. Mastery, the feeling of getting better at something. And purpose, finding deeper meaning behind what we do. But that doesn't mean we all have to work for a charity. Some people find their own purpose in their work. In one study, hospital janitors were interviewed about their job, and they identified the importance of their presence to comfort and entertain patients and families. Although this wasn't at all a part of their position description, many said it was their favourite part of what they did. So if we could all find meaning in our work, would we be unstoppable? Would we be miraculously in control, productive, and fulfilled? Well, perhaps it depends on our individual approach to work. Psychologists have proposed 3 distinct ways people approach their work: as a job, as a career, or as a calling. So maybe you're happy with your job just being a job, and it allows you to do other things that you enjoy. Maybe you want to grow and achieve great things in your career. Maybe you see your work as a calling and a passion that you were born to do. But regardless of how you see it, finding your purpose at work may just help to make those Monday mornings a little bit less of a struggle. Just maybe.
And welcome, and hey, I'm really loud and I'm echoey. Ooh, I like that sound. My name is Raja. I am the teaching pastor here at Uptown Community Church, and we're going to continue on a series we started a couple of weeks ago. First, let me just publicly thank Caitlin for teaching for the last couple of weeks. By the way, it's interesting to note when other people get to preach, because they get to kind of experience what I experience on a weekly basis. Terror, uncertainty, anxiety, all of that kind of goes into a Sunday morning sermon. And not only did she do one sermon, she did a series, which is, again, so daunting, and yet she nailed it. So I want to say a huge thank you to Caitlin. I don't take many Sundays off, but when I do, I'm glad to have a person like Katie Lynn there for me. So we started a series on the book of Ecclesiastes. I call the series Paradox. Now, the reason I'd call the series Paradox is because when you think about the idea, what the name of paradox means, it actually kind of encapsulates the book of Ecclesiastes. So a paradox is a statement or situation that may be true, but seems impossible or difficult to understand because it contains two opposite facts or characteristics. A statement that is seemingly contradictory or opposed to common sense, yet is perhaps true. Now, the book of Ecclesiastes has kind of mystified Christians historically. But I would say, however, that the further we get out into it, we have this harder time understanding what the book of Ecclesiastes is about. Also, fun fact is when you look at commentaries on Ecclesiastes from different cultures, they have a very different way of approaching this book. And so one of the things about Ecclesiastes for us in the Western culture, it kind of doesn't catch us in the fields, right? So a book of Ecclesiastes has asked all these questions, comes up with all these statements, you're like, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that actually means something. I don't know how to position that in my faith. But what's interesting about Ecclesiastes, especially for the Jewish culture by which it comes from, is that they see it as an important counterposition to the idea of worshiping Yahweh. They see Ecclesiastes saying, okay, let's ask the difficult questions. Let's say, okay, what about this? And how do we incorporate that into our faith? And so the reason I call this series Paradox is because Ecclesiastes in many ways is a paradox to the gospel. We looked at this article on 9 traits of people who lack meaning. So the first week we talked about what meaning is all about. And Roselle Umas came up with this great list. And the reason I love this list is if you go through the 9 things there, I guarantee you're going to find a few of them, if not many of them, that may apply to you. And again, this feeling or this sense is actually telling you something greater. So what's interesting is that when we think about meaning in this culture today, a lot of people don't really understand what meaning is. They don't understand where to get meaning from. And it feels very much in our world today that everything keeps shifting. So you go, oh, yes, this is definitely true. And a year later, wait, that's not as true as I thought it was. No, now this is definitely true. No, wait, that's not as true as I thought it was. And so what happens is meaning keeps shifting, and people are kind of stuck with, like, I don't know which way to go. If you've ever walked on, well, I don't think many people have, but 2 pieces of ice that are separating, you have one leg on one and one leg on the other, that's kind of how it feels trying to find meaning today. Is that you place yourself on this one, but all of a sudden this crack appears and you're all of a sudden drifting this way, and you got to decide which way you're going to go here. And that's very much what our culture's stuck at. We talked about this idea about the difference between meaning and purpose. And the reason why it's important to make sure you understand the distinction is purpose changes. People say, what's my purpose in life? It depends. Are you a student? Are you working full-time? Are you married? Are you single? Are you, like, whatever the context is, your purpose will shift. And the problem is that we have kind of interchanged purpose and meaning, and they are not meant to be. We ask the question as well, too, is that so if we say meaning is so important, how do you find it? Right? How do you find it? And the second question we ask is, well, who deserves to give meaning? Right? And we talked a little bit about this uncomfortable topic within Christianity, and that is celebrity Christians that perhaps have fallen or said really stupid things. And if you attach your identity to an individual, and that individual no longer represents what you once thought, well, what do? But the thing is, though, the book of Ecclesiastes is, well, that's actually kind of common. It's us who have forgotten that people are fallible. People are human. They'll make mistakes, they'll do dumb things, but that doesn't diminish from who God is. And oftentimes, when you're talking to somebody about Christianity, they may say of a situation or encounter or a Christian that's very much in the spotlight who was caught doing something or whatever, like, see? And we Christians shrink back like, oh, well, that's so true. And it's like, no. We don't have to make excuses for behavior because that's not our responsibility, because that doesn't diminish the truth of the gospel and who God is. And then we ask the question at the very end there, should it? Whatever we ask, whatever we sign, whatever we give meaning to, should it give meaning to us? And that's what I love about the book of Ecclesiastes. And this is one of the reasons why I want to come back to it. Because again, in our previous series, we were talking about the different myths people have about Christianity. Well, what's interesting is those myths are still prevalent today, and even Christians believe them. Well, the Bible may not be true. Maybe it's more mythology. Well, maybe we don't have to take everything literally, or, all these different negotiables, which are really not negotiable at all. But the reality is that what happens is that if we don't say to ourselves, well, okay, so then what should be giving me meaning? Unless we have the proper understanding where meaning comes from, we will always be stuck with this anxiousness about what it looks like. And one of the things we said about our in the very beginning week as well too is that, believe it or not, you, me, us, we are meaning-seeking creatures. We are. Whether we like to admit it or not, we are always seeking meaning. But again, this becomes a problem if we don't know where to assign it, what to assign it to. And so that's what we talked about in the first week. This morning, we're actually going to kind of jump into the first chapter of Ecclesiastes, the first part of it. But before I do that, I want to show you an article by Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger. I said to you that the Jewish community has a very different way of approaching Ecclesiastes than we do. Western Christianity is very uncomfortable with Ecclesiastes because it says things, but we don't know if they're actually supposed to be true. What I find interesting when people talk about the Bible is, well, someone will say to me, well, how can you believe in God? There's lots of murder and killing in the Bible. And I say to them, yeah, so? Well, that's not okay. I'm like, yeah, that's the point. It's not okay, and that's why it's there. And that's why the person says it's not okay. See, people think the Bible is this recipe book on how to be a good person. If that was the case, the Bible's kind of not a really great document for that, because there's lots of examples of people behaving badly. But the point of those reasons, the reasons why those exist, is the Bible wants to point out, yes, people behave badly, but people also don't behave badly. And the point is that the human condition, our human journey, is very much kind of this up and down. So while we can look at someone else and go, well, they or those, he, she, but if we look at ourselves and go, well, I'm not really kind of setting myself to that standard either. So Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger says this about the book of Ecclesiastes. Death is a problem. That's like a no-duh statement. It is death that seems to suck the meaning out of life. If it is all temporary, if after 60 or 80 or even 120 years it is all gone, then what's the point? If all of life is leading inexorably towards a time at which it disappears like a puff of smoke, then my existence is just an exercise in futility, and I might as well have never been lived to begin with. That's a very common statement. I wish I was never born. Right? What good am I doing? Right? What benefit have I given? If I didn't show up to work, if I didn't do this, would anybody even notice I'm gone? We all ask these questions. At some point in our lives, we will. These are very honest questions, but what the question is actually asking is about meaning, about what is it my purpose in life supposed to be? What's the meaning of my life supposed to be? They go on to say this: the book struggles with the meaning of life in light of death. Again and again, it repeats the refrain, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. As it catalogs our efforts to provide our lives with a sense of meaning by building monuments that will outlast us. A small number of us endeavor to amass wisdom that will be passed on and will live beyond our deaths. Many more of us amass material goods in great quantity, hoping somehow to create a permanence that will outlive our limited time on earth. We toil and we construct and we hoard. Sometimes perhaps sometimes we perhaps do not even consciously understand that it all arises from a vain desire to overcome the inevitable temporality of life. We carry within us a deep sense of humiliation in the face of death. It is degrading to live and then be gone forever and ever. And so we have an existential need to make a mark that will last. It's kind of heavy stuff, right? It's not stuff that most churches talk about on a Sunday morning, be frank with you. But this idea of like, okay, I go through life, I live my life. And again, it doesn't matter what age and stage. Now, when you're younger, you're not asking these questions. But as you start kind of getting up there a little bit, and by getting up there, I mean post-30s, you start asking these questions. And the more you ask these questions, the older you get, you look back and you say to yourself, well, have I even made a difference? I ask myself that question. I've been a pastor for way too long. But I look back and say to myself, did I actually even make a difference? I've been a youth pastor for 2 decades. Right? Did I even make a difference? Like, of all the work and all the effort, and I could say that with all of you. You sit there looking at me, whatever's going through your brain, and you can judge me on my sermon, but you don't realize how much work I put into this. I put everything I have into it, and you'll walk out here going, meh, yeah, I've heard better. I've heard funnier. I've seen taller people. I don't know, any one of those things there. So you ask yourself, do I actually make a difference? Do I have any meaning? And by the way, these are great questions. But again, what Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger is saying is, this is the part of us that we don't really like to talk about. But what I love about the fact is that the Bible does talk about the parts we don't like to talk about. This is why I said the very first week, the worst line that could ever happen within Christianity is happily ever after. Walt Disney. Good guys always win. It always works out in the end. That's not the case. That's not real life. And if the Bible was based upon Disney, we'd go, well, but it's not. And so we look at our lives, and again, we can look back on them. We can say to ourselves, however long you've been on this planet, we say to ourselves, have I made a difference? Have I made an impact? And by the way, I think that's a really great question. And I think it's a great question because sometimes the answers might be uncomfortable. But I think that's an important question to ask. Finally, but it won't. And even if it will, you will be gone. So what does it matter? All the fame and glory and of accomplishment, whether material, intellectual accomplishment, will not solve the problem. All the books and theorems that we have authored, all the buildings and treasuries that may live on after our death can never plug that black hole in our souls created by awareness of our own mortality. As I read it, that is the intention of the chord, vanity, vanity, all is vanity, to which the author of Ecclesiastes returns again and again. And again, they're not wrong. Vanity, vanity, everything is vanity. If everything's vanity, then what's the point? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Maybe. So let's jump in. Chapter 1. First one we talked about last week says this. These are the words of the teacher, King David's son, who ruled in Jerusalem. So without going into it, King Solomon is the author of the book of Ecclesiastes. He self-references himself, and only he could actually write this book because the stuff he's going to say, the stuff he's going to observe, and we're going to talk about this a little bit further on, but just so you know, your perspective on life is also based upon a socioeconomic background. So again, when you have little, what you look at life is very different when you have a lot. He has a lot. As a matter of fact, he's had more a lot than anybody else almost in history, except for a couple of people. So he has a very interesting view of life and the world. And what's interesting is if I say to you, would you like to win the lottery? I guarantee you, if we're all honest, somebody maybe hooked you up to a lie detector, most of us say yes. I'd like to win the lottery. And I don't want to win a lot, just 5 million. Just I'm not greedy. I don't need 30. 5 will do me fine. That's fine. I can live in humble circumstance with $5 million, right? Point is this. As we all think to ourselves, money is the answer. Affluence is the answer. Well, King Solomon's going to tell you, not so much. And we'll see why shortly. So just a quick note here. The word translated teacher is a Hebrew word koheleth, and it literally means one who assembles. The designation is used only 7 times in all of Scriptures, and all 7 times are in the book of Ecclesiastes. Since the assembler here is imparting an array of wisdom and knowledge, koheleth is often translated as teacher or preacher. So it's interesting to note that the book of Ecclesiastes is meant for public discourse. Because a lot of times you will have a hard time finding Christians talking about the book of Ecclesiastes because, again, it's uncomfortable. And it says things that like, well, I don't know if that's supposed to be there. But what's interesting about it is that it actually was designed to actually be put out there to kind of provoke a reaction. I love how Ray Stedman, though, in his commentary on this, he says this. The word for preacher is the Hebrew word koheleth, which really means the one who gathers, assembles, or collects things. This is an apt title for the author of this book, who has examined and then collected together the philosophies by which men live. But I think a more accurate English word to translate this would be the searcher. Here's a searching mind which has looked all over life and seen what is behind the actions of people. That is the word which I'm going to use wherever the word the preacher occurs. It is not really a preacher or proclaimer, but a searcher that is in view. And I think he's right. Right? King Solomon is searching through this world, trying to say, okay, can I find something to give me meaning? And again, King Solomon almost has access to everything. And again, you can say, well, he didn't have the internet. That might be a bonus, actually. He didn't have Facebook or TikTok or anything like that. Again, might be a bonus, but still, he had what few people in this world ever had, and that is a view of this world and every aspect of it to kind of draw some conclusions from. The beginning of Solomon's reign was the height of the Jewish nation's political strength. Israel, its land, and alliances became the center of civilization during Solomon's reign. Solomon writes a book of Ecclesiastes as the king, a position of maximum authority at this time of Jewish prosperity. Now, this is important. Israel is going to go through ups and downs. But if you read through the history properly, it's a more downs than it is ups. But if you ask people who look back upon Jewish history, King Solomon's time is the golden era. It's the era where there was the most peace and the most people had the most amount of money. And by the way, if you're always being attacked by surrounding nations, true today as it was back then, peace is kind of an important commodity. So when King Solomon's writing this book, he's not writing in a time of war because, by the way, in the time of war, meaning or purpose may be tested. In the time of suffering, meaning and purpose will be tested. In the time of pleasure, and that's the time that the book of Ecclesiastes is written, meaning will be tested. And the reason why I think the book of Ecclesiastes speaks so well to us today, we are in the time of pleasure. We are in the time of affluence. Now, again, I understand. You can say to me, well, I'm a student. I'm eating ramen every night. That's great. At least you're eating every night because, again, 80% of the world's population, 80% of the world's population is not as affluent as you, whether you're a student or whatever part of life you are. 80% of the world's population. So, believe it or not, you are King Solomon. You get to sit on your throne, looking around this world and say, well, what gives me meaning? So what's interesting about it is the time he's writing. Now, of course, the next refrain is the one we looked at, is when King Solomon says this: everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. The New King James Version says this: vanity of vanities, says a preacher. Vanities of vanities, all is vanity. Now, I think a good translation would be temporary. Temporary is a really good translation of this. Now, the reason for that, the word for vanity is a Greek word called hebel. The Hebrew word hebel is translated here as vanity. All other translations, you choose a word meaningless. A more literal translation is warm breath or vapor. Used throughout the Old Testament, this can refer to either a positive or negative circumstance. In Ecclesiastes 11:10, hebel is translated fleeting. It is an inherently neutral term whose meaning is determined by context. In the introductory statement of the preacher, it is literally a literary device meant to provoke or arouse interest. So at the beginning, King Solomon says, your life is just a breath. If your life is just a breath, just a moment, what are you doing with it? Or if it's just a breath, does it even matter? Right? Does it even matter? And again, he's doing this in such a way, he's opening the book up in such a way so that to provoke or arouse the interest of the reader. Because just to repeat to you, this feels very anti-Christian. It feels very anti-God. If everything is meaningless, well, what is God doing? Right? What is God doing if everything is meaningless? And again, this is in our Bible. Right? This is not Nietzsche, not Hegel, not Kant. This is in our Bible, which means we have to take it seriously. It's there for a reason. Fun fact, though, in the Middle Ages, there was debate that we should remove this. There's a lot of things I don't want the peasants to know about, or maybe to talk about, or maybe a certain upper class don't want them having, an existential crisis. So maybe we should kind of get this book out of the Bible. But the fact that it stayed there is because wiser minds understand that the questions the researcher is going to ask are really important. Now, let's go to verse 3-8. What do people get for all their hard work under the sun? Generations come, generations go, but the earth never changes. The sun rises and the sun sets, and then hurries to rise again. The wind blows south, then turns north. Around and round it glows, blowing in circles. Rivers run into the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns again to the rivers and flows out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome beyond description. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. You see what I mean? This is kind of like depressing. Like, I feel like I should be playing the Doors or something in the background, or maybe from my era, the Smiths. I don't know what would be the version for today. But again, it's very depressing because as he's saying this, there's a part of us that goes, yeah, you can work a full day. You can do whatever you want. You'll go to bed at night, but the next day, all over again. I was talking to this young preacher. This is actually about a couple of years ago. I was asked to be a part of when everything was online, I was asked to be part of a mentoring group for other pastors, young pastors and all that. And apparently I was old, so I should help young pastors. And I thought, hey, I'm young. Apparently I'm not. And I was talking to this one young pastor, and he said, so how many people teach at your church? I'm like, oh, we're a church plant. It's just me. He goes, you preach every week? I said, yeah. He goes, oh, okay. So like who writes your sermons for you, or where do you download? I'm like, no. I do it myself. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah. He goes, because that's the part I don't understand about being a pastor. He's like, having to preach every week. I said, yeah, here's a little fun fact for you. You'll spend a lot of time on your sermon. They'll present it to your church. They'll judge you nicely or not so nicely. And Monday morning, all over again. Wearisome. Everything is wearisome. And he was right. It's kind of a grind. But it's not just me. Like, this is what I do. It's okay. I love doing it, so don't cry for me, Argentina. But you all do the same thing. You all go to work. Every day you get up. You walk in, and whatever the context of whatever you do, part of you can ask is like, really? Is this like, right? And the writer is asking a question that we often would like to rather ignore. We'd rather not think about this. And just so you know, if you're retired, it gets a little bit worse, actually. What do I do with myself now? No one's paying me to do anything. I'm now retired, so what do I do now? Meaningless. Right? So the questions are actually kind of important. Now, a couple notes here about this. In verse 3, we have a question which he continually used in his search. What does man gain by all the toil which he toils under the sun? In other words, work. What is the profit of it to him? This is an interesting Hebrew word meaning that which is left over. Now, this is important. After he has sucked dry all the immediate delight, joy, or pleasure out of something, what is left over and what endures? What will remain to continually feed the hunger of his life for satisfaction? That is the right question. It is a question we are all asking. Is there anything that will really minister continually to my need? That's that sunum bonum, which means the highest good. Which if I find it, I do not need to look any further. Is there any key to continual pleasure, delight, and joy in life? So, have a good day at work, have a bad day at work. Have a good day in school, have a bad day in school. Does it even matter? Right? When you first start off your university or college, you start off day one, and you know everything, and you're good to go. You start your new job. Walk in there, and it's like, I'm going to be everybody's friend, and we're all going to get along. And then about a week later, you're like, I hate this place. And the person next to me, if they keep breathing through their nose, I'm going to punch them. I just swear to you, I will, right? It doesn't matter. The point is, the honeymoon is quickly over in whatever way we look at it. But then the question we ask ourselves is, well, what is left over? What is left over? When you go to work, when you go to school, in your relationships, in your life, after you do whatever has to be done, what is left over? And whatever's left over, is that enough to minister to me? And I think that's a really great question because it's asking us a question about meaning. Does that meaning we have go to work with us, go to school with us in our relationships, or is it kind of conditional based upon how we feel and what we think? To illustrate this point, Solomon launches into a poem about the cycles of nature. Humans come and go, but nature keeps on repeating its cycles. And that's absolutely true, right? No matter what you do, no matter what happens to you, the sun is going to rise tomorrow, and it's going to set tomorrow night. And in between that time, life happens. And again, whatever happens, the sun's going to come up, the sun's going to go down. So this repetition is kind of how we mark time. I was talking to somebody, and they're like, oh yeah, I was talking to so-and-so and whatever, and they told me their age. And I'm like, wait a minute, that can't be that old. That means I'm this old. And that happens all the time, right? That happens all the time. So last year? I think it was last year. Last year, I had a high school reunion, and it was 30 years since we had graduated high school. And all of us got together, well, not all of us, but most of us from our graduating class got together. And it was weird, right? Because I already told you about this before, but A, none of us changed. We're all pretty much the same as we were in high school. So here's a little fun fact for you. Annoying in high school, annoying as an adult. But that doesn't change. But the point was interesting is that we were sitting there going, 30 years. 30 years since we were in high school. How is that even possible that 30 years have passed? When you say 30 years out loud, you're like, that seems like a lifetime. And for many of you, you haven't even hit 30 yet, so I get that. But for us, we're like, 30 years since we were in high school. And of course, one person thought they would be very clever and put all our high school photos on the wall. And you look at your 30-year-old self, you're like, well, A, I had great hair. But B, is like, wow, I was really dumb back then. Right? I was like, oh, I thought I knew what the life was going to happen, but no, I did not. So when we think about this idea of Ecclesiastes, there's a very uncomfortable conversation happening over the passage of time and based upon what you do in the time. There are a few words for work in the book of Ecclesiastes. The Hebrew word amal, used here, refers to troublesome work. It has a negative connotation and is often translated toil, labor, mischief, misery, sorrow, grievance, etc. You know, good stuff. Throughout the Old Testament is particularly the strain of struggle of work. Amal occurs in verses both as a noun and a verb, which is translated as does. This makes it a very strong statement. In all his work which he does, this toilsome labor, which is used 35 times in Ecclesiastes. Here's the question: what advantages does it bring? The presumption is that it's going to happen. Life has a toil. So in my other job, I'm the lead trainer in my store right now, and so my job is to train all the new staff, right? And so they said, okay, hey, all these new people coming aboard, you get to train them. I'm like, fantastic. And by the way, it was fun. But one of the things I said to them, because again, we're in a retail experience, I said, hey, can I ask you a question to these people who are entering into this company? I said, when is the last time you had a great retail experience? Like you walked in a store and your restaurant and you walked out and you're like, wow, that was really great. Every one of them were like, I can't remember. Right? I can't remember. If I said to you, when's the last time you walked into a store or you walked into a restaurant and you had an amazing experience that you remembered afterwards, most of you would go, like when you walk into a store, hey, where's that? Yeah, they point like 30 aisles down that way. It's 30 aisles that way. It's on the left side, somewhere there. Go ahead and find out for yourself. Okay, all right, I'm going to go do that. And you wander in that store for 30 days, and one of the times you'll run into the Minotaur at some point in time, right? So it's like, what? Like, no, it doesn't happen. And what's interesting is that people are thinking to themselves, well, what I was trying to train them, what we try to do is we try to give great experience. And again, you're like, but that's the ideal. Point is this. Work in the book of Ecclesiastes is seen as toil, amal. Now that's kind of interesting because many people will ask themselves, well, what should I get? What kind of pleasure should I get from work? Did you know? Well, actually, no, I'm not going to tell you that one. I'll show you in a second there. Here's the other thing too with work. The results of work are temporary. We eat, but soon after are hungry. We gather wealth, but cannot take it with us when we die. Therefore, the results of work are vaporous. Remember that word? Vanity. There is no apparent advantage. Solomon has great wisdom, skill to observe, and when he does, the benefit of work is not apparent. And for all of you, you know, yeah, okay, that one I believe. 85% of employees are dissatisfied with their workplace. 85% of people right there are doing a job they don't like, and if they had a better job offered, they would take it. It's kind of a high percentage if you think about it. Like if I said to you, hey, by the way, you're going to do this for the next, okay, let's just say you graduate or you enter into your job 25. Now, we know Freedom 55 is a joke anymore, so I'm not going to bother with that one. But let's just say 30 years from then, you're going to be done. Look back. How was that 30 years? I know, it gets really quiet in this room really quickly, right? Because we're like, oh, right? It just went like that. And it was a toil, it was a grind, it was this, it was that. A lot of people just don't like what they do. I understand that. But what's interesting is when you look at all the data and all the research, during the pandemic, there was what was called the Great what's it, this great split or the great retirement or the great shift or a whole bunch of different people basically did. But basically, during the pandemic, people said, you know what? I can't go back to that job. When we go back to work, I can't go back to that. Therefore, I'm going to try something different. That's fine. That's fair. But what's interesting is that when we think about this idea of work, according to most data, people really can't afford to live right now. Between rent, between food, and the other services you need, people are having a hard time making ends meet. So you say to yourself, I'm going to do this job in the morning till the night, whatever my hours are. I'm going to get a paycheck. I'm like, wait, why is this big chunk taken off? Who's the government? I don't know about them. Why do they get so much of my paycheck? What do I get back from? That's a different conversation. And you go, okay, so I get my paycheck back. This is what's been taken away, and this is what I have left. Okay. So from what I have left, I got to pay rent. I got to buy food. I got to pay my cell phone bill, which, by the way, in Canada, we have the 7th highest cell phone bills in the world. Fun fact. I don't know what cell phone war we lost, but it was bad, and now we pay the 7th highest cell phone rates in the world. So, way to go, Canada. And so you go down the list. Now, again, I'm being tongue-in-cheek, but honestly, at my other place that I work at, Rave Hope, people are having a hard time. At Rave Hope, we're having a hard time keeping our pantry full. We have more people accessing food services than we've ever had in the history of the Rave Hope. Meals, right? People coming in for meals. We're not just getting people who are maybe living in a tent or might be vulnerable, that they're still there. But we're having families now. People who you would not expect to come are coming for meals now. We know that right now in our society, people are having a hard time. And please understand, I know you know that. Because you're like, that's me. But the writer of Ecclesiastes is asking you a question. In the midst of that, what's your response? And that's a difficult question. Verse 9-11. History merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say, here is something new, but actually it's old. Nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened in the past, and in future generations, no one will remember what we're doing now. I don't know about you, but I read this and I'm like, oh, this was written a couple of thousand years ago, but it could be written yesterday. True story. So, as you many know, I was in San Francisco a week ago now, and I was doing some training there. And in my training group, we had a lot of people from the UK. So, there's about 100 of us being trained. 80 of them were from the UK. Scotland, Ireland, London, And we were having this conversation. So, we're on this meal, we're at lunchtime, and I was at a table, and I was fascinated by a lot of them, right? And so I was just sitting at a table with them, and I was listening to the conversation, and this one person was saying to this older person something about World War II, and I'm like, oh wait, I should probably listen to this because I'm just curious. And the young person said, yeah, we never studied about World War II in school. And the old person's like, what? Like, yeah, when I got to entry level into high school, we chose what we were supposed to do, and history wasn't one of the things I had to take. So the older person said to the younger person, so you've never studied World War II? No. And the older person said to the younger person, well, so then what's a Nazi? And the young person said, well, I thought that's what we use today. I thought that term was made up today. And I'm sitting here listening to this, and I'm like, wait, what? How is this even possible? However, this is happening more and more. As people become more and more specific in what they study, the generalization of what they should study is kind of falling off. So while I was surprised by this conversation, I'm hearing this conversation, but in my hotel room, I'm kind of reading through the book of Ecclesiastes. And of course, this verse there, this package of verses, kind of jumped out at me. Here's the thing, what's interesting, is there's a lot of talk right now in our culture about things that we thought we had figured out. In the 1960s, we had the civil rights movement. We talked about racism, and we talked about, and Dr. King helped us to understand that we don't judge a person by the color of their skin, by the content of their character. Go, yes, okay. But now, we look back and go, maybe not. We say we talk about the suffragette movement. We talk about granting women's rights, and we talk about how women need to have this class themselves and all that. And we go, yes, absolutely. Now, I don't know. The only reason I say this, and the reason I'm kind of using those two examples, there's so many other examples, is right now in our culture, we are re-examining things we thought we had established. And I do think that there are certain ways we're looking at it, like, oh, you know what? There are broader ways to understand this. I'm like, that's great. But there's other ways, too, that I think we are probably going backwards a little bit as well, too. It's like, okay. So how do we kind of do that? Now, again, we think to ourselves, no, we figured this out. History, time passing, one generation to the next generation. One generation thinks they've established something, but the next generation goes, you know what, not so much, and starts all over again. And again, I do think that there are some really interesting ways of looking at that, but sometimes I think we lose something as well. The writer of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon, saying the exact same thing. Here is something new. Not that new. Not that new. We think it's new because it's new for you, but generations ago we already talked about this. But now we're talking about it again. The preacher Solomon asserts that determining our purpose in life from observation, reason, or invention is futile. He looks into how events in time are cyclical and therefore are insufficient avenues for completing his search for meaning. Nothing circumstantial is truly new or resolved. And that's true, right? So look at remember beforehand, he uses the idea of time. So time presents a formidable support of Solomon's assertion that all is vanity or vaporous in verse 2, because the more time passes, the more things repeat. Observing events through time renders the conclusion that all things are wearisome. There is no observable purpose, no destination that can be determined from observation and reason. And that is absolutely true. You think you know something, but then another generation comes along and goes, no. And you're like, okay. So how do we approach it this way? The next three lines of the poem provide a cluster of three images: words that cannot be told, eyes that cannot see with understanding, and ears that cannot hear. Each has an inadequacy. The words or things are wearisome, and men are not able to properly speak. Human explanations fall short. They will be inadequate. Simply put, we don't have the capacity to understand and explain our purpose based upon reason and observation. Evidence-based. No, the evidence is this. Well, I don't care if the evidence is that. I don't believe it. I had a conversation with a person who was a flat earther. I met one. I was fascinated by this individual because I thought they were just a joke. I thought they didn't exist. But this guy literally believed the earth was flat. So I did what I normally do. Well, what about the pictures in space? Oh, they're made up. Well, what about, and I'm like, so I said, okay, obviously I'm not going to convince you. You convince me that the earth is flat. Well, let's talk. And so he went on and on for 45 minutes, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is awesome. Because he really, really believed the earth was flat. And again, I thought this was like a meme or something, but no, he really did. But the point is, though, is that evidence doesn't really mean you're going to believe something. And I find it kind of interesting. The eye is not satisfied with what it sees. It wants to see more. But more is never enough. When attempting to discern the meaning and purpose for humanity, the advantage of our efforts, observation does not lead to comprehension. Here's an interesting fact. You can Google almost any piece of information and get page after page after page after page of results. Does not mean you understand it. It's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And that's one of the distinctions the book of Ecclesiastes is going to teach us. You may know something, but you may not understand something. And those two are vastly, vastly different. As a matter of fact, there's an interesting movement happening in the States right now where a couple of individuals who are really into education and education development are talking about how we need to not teach people like the times table or these other things. He goes, that's not important anymore. What's important is how do we know which piece of information is actually superior to another? I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Because I remember when I was in school, again, back in the Stone Ages, the times tables are really important. You have to memorize the times table. Today, everyone's got a calculator in their pocket, call a phone. So is that not important anymore? And I was like, oh, okay. Again, I'm not saying it's how important. It's not important. The point is, though, is what they were saying is that access to information is no longer difficult. Understanding which information is actually relevant and not, that's something that's more important. I thought, that might be interesting. Humans are not original creators. We are reorganizers. Solomon asks a rhetorical question that demands a negative reply. Is there anything of which one might say, see this, it is new? He claims, no, it already existed before. And again, Ray Stedman says it this way. This book is an examination of secular wisdom and knowledge. The book clearly states at the outset that it is limiting itself to that which is apparent to the natural mind. And this is going to be a key that we're going to unlock towards the end of it. So let me give you 3 things I think that are important from the couple of verses. The first is this. Meaning is an anchor point. And I need you to understand this really important part. If meaning is an anchor point, and I love this illustration because if their anchor point is wrong in this one, this guy's dead. Meaning is an anchor point. And so wherever we anchor meaning towards has to be stronger than we think it is because it's going to be tested. The weight of experience, the wearisomeness, all the toil, all the words the writers already use now, meaning is an anchor point. The writer of Hebrews says it this way, this hope is a strong and trustworthy anchor for our souls. It leads us through the curtain to God's inner sanctuary. Obviously, as you know, I believe that God is a worthy anchor. That is the only place, the only person who deserves an anchor point. And by the end of Ecclesiastes, you will see why the writer is going to test everything else to see if that's a worthwhile anchor point. Spoiler alert, it's not going to be. The second thing we need to understand is everything is temporary. This is something we talk about a lot, but as Christians, we've kind of forgotten it. We've built these churches that are supposed to last us, right? The cathedrals took generations to finish. Beautiful. But the person who first started the cathedral is now dead and gone. And many cathedrals are now lie empty. Everything is temporary. Everything is temporary. 2 Corinthians 4:18, for the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. This is a really important distinction I think the Western church has forgotten. That we think so highly of what we can see or we can touch or our social media presence or these type of things, and I get that. But as Christ followers, the true understanding of this world is that which is unseen will last forever. Meaning and purpose and our actions and again, the question we ask ourselves is, am I actually making a difference? These are echoes that have repercussions. And I think as a Christ follower, as a person who believes in God, that's an important piece of it. And finally, be careful where you get your meaning from. Right now, we live in a consumeristic culture, and that is true. And I'm not asking you to eject everything you have, but the reality is this, is we have to ask ourselves is what are we attaching our meaning to? What is it that gives us meaning? So if you feel bad, you go shopping to make yourself feel better. We all do it or have done it, but that should be a warning sign. Right? That serotonin, that dopamine fix when you buy that new thing, that's temporary. Why? A week or 2 weeks later, I need to buy something new. Romans chapter 1:25a, they traded the truth about God for a lie. They worshipped and served the things God created instead of the Creator himself. And this is kind of an important part to the book of Ecclesiastes. So let me give you the Roger Stone version of the second verse of Ecclesiastes. Everything is temporary, says Koheleth Raja, completely temporary. What? It's a good translation. Everything is temporary. Everything is temporary. Except for, not going to tell you yet. But it's interesting that everything we can see is temporary. So when we think to ourselves, how long should you live? What should you experience? What expectations should you have with the future? I would say to you, I'm not 100% sure. You can start off as a job, but you may shift from that job in 5 years, like, I hate it. I met this person. They went to school to be a teacher. went through all the school, and back in the day when they got the job, they actually got a full-time job, which is very difficult to get as a teacher. 5 years here, and they quit. Why? They hated kids. Like, you didn't know that beforehand? But they said, I want my summers off. I'm like, that I get. I'm absolutely sympathetic to that idea. But they didn't like the kids. They just couldn't do it. They said they were just, the tension and all that. I'm like, okay. So then they had to shift careers and all that, and that's fine. The point is this. You think you know the future holds. You think you know what's going to happen. You just don't. Everything is temporary. Every relationship you have, everything you purchase, all the foundations you think are so important, everything is temporary. Let me close. 1 Corinthians 15:22. This is a feel-good verse. Just as everyone dies because we all belong to Adam, everyone who belongs to Christ will be given a new life. See, I believe as a Christ follower, it doesn't matter how mundane of a job you've had. And just so you know, I've had the worst jobs. Like, I could tell you some of the stuff I had to do for a paycheck. Horrible. But the point is this. As a Christ follower, that's not where you get meaning from. And I love how Paul writing to the church in Corinth, he's separating two ideas out. If you belong to Adam, you live, you die. You belong to Christ, you have a new filter, a new way to look at this world, a new way to look at your job. Please understand something very clearly. I would love for you to love your job, your career, your calling, however you want to call it. I would love for you to do that. And there is nothing wrong with enjoying that. Just so you know, the 3 spheres of my life, I love the heck out of all of them. I do. I'm weird that way, but I do. I'm one of the most fortunate people in the world that I love what I do. And all the things I do. Not everybody gets that. But I believe as Christ followers, we could all get that. Why? Because what you do is necessarily who you are. And the meaning that happens in that context, according to how God gives us a vision and a purpose for this world, we get new life. We don't belong to Adam anymore. We get a new life. And that new life is what the book of Ecclesiastes is going to test. It's going to look at. Let's bow our heads. Let's pray. We do this every week, so no, don't panic. Heads are bowed. Eyes are closed. Worship team's going to come back up and lead us through one more song. But I do want you to take an opportunity right now to reflect, to meditate, to think. It is kind of depressing to ask ourselves the question, what's the point of my life? It is kind of depressing. It kind of gives us an existential dread to say to ourselves, what's the purpose of my life? After all these years, when I look back, what impact have I made? The goal of this sermon is not to make you feel bad about that, but the goal of the sermon is to ask you this question, is what do you attach meaning to? Because if you have the wrong perspective, you will always have the wrong answer. No matter how old you are, looking back on your life, if you look back through natural eyes, through secular wisdom, you can say, well, my life has been pointless. But as a Christ follower, you no longer belong to Adam, but you belong to Christ. You belong to Jesus. And in that, there's a new life, new perspective, new meaning given to you. My prayer for each one of you is that you find purpose and meaning in what you do and who you're with and all that. But I also want you to know, too, no matter what it is you think you're going to have, it is still temporary. But there is someone who exists outside of that. And that individual, that person, Christ, calls us to more. Dear Lord Jesus, I thank you that you have granted us new life. But God, please forgive us when we still attach too much meaning to this temporary life. God, I pray for each person here that whether it's school or work or whatever context they find themselves, retirement even, Lord, that the context of our lives, whatever we're doing, is not the thing that we look to give us meaning. But instead, we realize, God, that wherever you've placed us is an opportunity for the kingdom of Jesus. Holy Spirit, I pray you'd speak to our hearts and to our minds to give us a fresh context, a fresh vision of our purposes in the lives you've given us, but also the reinforcement of where we get meaning from. Jesus, I thank you that you've given us new life. And new life means we look at this life differently. We see opportunity where we never expected to be before. And we live our lives open-handed, knowing that everything we try to hold on to so tightly, friends, family, finances, whatever it might be, health, well, these things are temporary. Temporary. Everything is temporary except for you, Lord Jesus. Speak to us now in Jesus' name. Amen.